Hi. Today, we'd like to talk about discharging your fiduciary duties and some ways in which we can protect ourselves as planned fiduciaries. So, specifically, under what's called ERISA provision 316, administrative fiduciaries. So, we've covered this before, but when a company is setting up, what is the very, very first step that they have to follow? Well, a good first step is setting up the retirement plan committee because you've got to figure out who are the plan fiduciaries. Now, a plan fiduciary needs a plan fiduciary advisor. I'm a certified plan fiduciary advisor, a CPFA, but there still are others that we can bring to the table, both others that they can help provide services, but also others that can outsource some fiduciary responsibility. So, one would be the record keeper. I will tell you that very little of what they do is fiduciary in nature. But sometimes you also bring in an outside administrator. If the record keeper can't do both record keeping and administration, sometimes you bring in an outside record keeper. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of having an outside third party administrator unless they're willing to kind of take on some fiduciary responsibility. So, what does it actually mean to outsource under ERISA 316 the administrative fiduciary responsibility? That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, you might also remember that the certified plan fiduciary advisor can serve as an ERISA 321 and an ERISA 338, which is what we do. Our goal is to make sure that every single seat at the table is filled, including that of a named fiduciary under ERISA 402A. So, what does it mean actually to be an ERISA 316 fiduciary? Well, the responsibilities of the employer without the 316 are enormous. Everything from investment choices to plan design, notices and notifications, even if the administrator or record keeper is sending those out, the employer is legally responsible for whether or not those are correct or whether or not those are done in a timely fashion. The contributions, the distributions, everything, the employer is responsible for those kind of things. The responsibilities of the service provider, if you're not using a 316, are to keep records and send statements, which are paper copies of those records, and provide a website, which is the electronic copy of those records. They might do the testing and prepare the Form 5500, but by no means are they signing the Form 5500 because they're not a fiduciary. In fact, nothing that they do is legal or fiduciary in nature. They have no legal or fiduciary responsibility at all. That's without the 316. With the 316, the fiduciary piece moves to the service provider's side of the ledger. So the service provider still keeps records, sends statements, provides the website, all of the record keeping functions. They still do the testing. But now not only do they do the testing and prepare the 5500, they sign the 5500 because they are a fiduciary. The ERISA 316 outsourced fiduciary can actually take on responsibilities like signing the Form 5500 as a fiduciary and yet still do all the things that they were doing as an administrator, although now taking legal responsibility for whether or not the notices are done correctly, distributions and loans, withdrawals are all processed correctly. That's all going to fall on the 316 administrator. In fact, with a 316 service provider, the only responsibilities left for the employer are to send the payroll file and to monitor the fiduciaries. That's really important. I mean, the fiduciary cannot reach into your bank account and pull contributions. So it's still going to be your responsibility as the employer to make sure that contributions are made in a timely fashion. So you'll have that responsibility. And of course, you'll have the responsibility to monitor the fiduciaries. The only way you can not be a fiduciary is to not sponsor a plan. You can outsource to a fiduciary, but then your fiduciary responsibility is to monitor the fiduciary to whom you've outsourced fiduciary responsibility. You're still a fiduciary, but that's what it means to be a 316. Remember, ERISA requires that a fiduciary discharge their fiduciary duties as much as they're able to, solely in the interest of plan participants for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to those plan participants as a prudent person would, diversifying the account and following the plan document. These are things that are required of a planned fiduciary. And there are several different ways in which we can delegate fiduciary authority. Most specifically, we're talking today about 316 and 402A, the two that are at the top of the list. So what does it mean to be a 316? This is the actual wording that's in the law under Code Section 316. It says that a person is specifically designated by terms of the instrument. Now, that's legal terms for document. So the plan document basically it allows you to designate someone to be the plan administrator. Here's what I think interesting. It says in 316A, Section 2, if an administrator is not so designated, it's the plan sponsor. So every plan has a 316. Your plan, every plan has a 316. The question is whether it's you or someone else. If you've not outsourced 316 responsibility to an outsourced discharged third party fiduciary, then as the plan fiduciary, as the employer, as the plan sponsor, you are the 316. You are the administrator if one is not so designated. You also have an ERISA 402A name fiduciary because it actually says here in the code that the term name fiduciary means a fiduciary who is named in the plan instrument. So by default, if you don't have a named fiduciary naming someone other than someone at your company, like to sign documents and sign the Form 5500, then by default, it's you. So every plan has a 402A and a 316, but under ERISA Code Section 402A and ERISA Code Section 316, you have the ability to discharge fiduciary responsibility to someone other than yourself. And that's really important, okay? Because our goal is to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary risk in the sponsorship of your employee benefit plan for your employees. All right. Hey, do you guys have any other questions about 316? Let me know, and we'll cover those in a future session or a future video. Okay. Be well.